The cold gray sky of Kalen 9 was quiet as the alien warship slowly hovered over the planet's surface. General Skorvex of the Wedrath Empire stood tall on the command deck, his deep violet armor shining under artificial lights. His long, sharp fingers tapped on the railing while his piercing eyes studied the screen ahead. "Humans," he muttered with a mocking tone. "They always scream, run, and then die." Behind him, his officers stood ready, silent and respectful. The invasion was beginning. Skorvex had led over 20 such missions across the galaxy. No planet had ever resisted him for more than a few days. This time, he expected the same. The target was Kalen 9, a human colony world on the edge of the Orion sector. It was lightly guarded, home to farmers, miners, and settlers. Intelligence had reported minimal military presence. "A perfect target, deploy ground units," Skorvex ordered calmly. "Wipe the surface clean." Metal doors opened beneath the warship, and thousands of armored drop pods rained down to the planet below. Within each pod was a Wedrath soldier, trained for battle, stronger than any human, and fully armed with energy weapons. The ground shook as the pods crashed into the soil. Alien soldiers marched forward, scanning for movement. They fired at anything that moved: automated turrets, flying drones, even small homes. At first, it went as expected. Screams, fire, humans running for cover. Then something changed in a ruined city street. A group of Wedrath soldiers spotted a human in armor standing alone. The alien leader barked an order, and they opened fire. Dust flew everywhere. When it settled, the human was still standing. He didn't fire back immediately. Instead, he walked slowly toward them. His armor was old, dented, and scratched, but he moved with purpose. One of the Wedrath tried to charge. The human dropped him with a single shot to the head. The others panicked and tried to retreat, but more humans appeared. From behind walls, from rooftops, from the shadows. They didn't scream. They didn't run. They fought. Back on the warship, Skorvex leaned forward in disbelief. "Replay that footage," he growled. The video looped. His soldiers were being outmaneuvered by humans using nothing more than small rifles and clever tactics. They set traps. They used smoke. They aimed for weak points in the armor. It was chaos. "This must be an elite squad," one officer suggested. "No," Skorvex replied. "These are colonists." The general frowned. Something didn't feel right. How were colonists standing against one of the strongest armies in the galaxy? He ordered his ship to scan the battlefield again. Heat signatures showed dozens, no, hundreds of humans moving as organized units. They weren't running. They were holding the lines. Some were even pushing the aliens back. Down on the planet, Sergeant Cole, a human soldier with a scar across his jaw, ducked behind a burned-out vehicle. His team was down to 5, but they weren't giving up. "Reload!" he shouted. "Cover left! Push to the tower!" One of his soldiers was hit in the shoulder. Blood spilled, but the man got back up, tied a cloth around the wound, and kept fighting. "We don't stop!" Cole roared. The aliens fired again. One human was pinned. Cole ran into open fire, grabbed his teammate, and pulled him back. Bullets whizzed past him. One grazed his helmet. He didn't stop. Behind them, a radio crackled. It was Colonel Mason, the leader of the Ghost Battalion. "Sergeant, hold position. Reinforcements en route. Don't let them pass," Cole grinned. "Copy that. We're still breathing." Back on the warship, Skorvex watched another disturbing feed. One of his elite warriors had captured a human. He stabbed the man through the chest, but the human didn't scream. Instead, he laughed, grabbed the alien's arm, and fired his sidearm into the alien's face. "That's impossible," the general whispered. His science officer stepped forward. "General, we have studied human biology. They should not be able to take this much damage." "Then explain it." "I can't." Skorvex stared at the screen. He watched as injured humans refused to stay down. Soldiers missing limbs kept crawling and firing. Some used each other's backs to steady their weapons. He had never seen this kind of madness. "They are not following logic," he said. "They are following something else." The general ordered more dropships to land. He sent in heavy armor, flying drones, shock units. But every time, the humans adapted. They changed their tactics, used the terrain, and never gave up. One battle showed. A group of humans surrounded inside a warehouse. Instead of waiting to be crushed, they wired explosives to the roof, dropped a truck through the floor, and escaped through the sewers. Skorvex felt something unusual, something he hadn't felt in years. Doubt. He turned to his strategist. "How many units have we lost?" "Almost 3,000, sir, and more being reported missing every hour." "To colonists?" "Yes, sir." He didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the window and looked down at the burning world. Kalen 9 was supposed to be an easy victory. Now it was turning into a nightmare. Meanwhile, on the surface, Colonel Mason gathered with other resistance leaders in an underground bunker. His voice was calm but firm. "They thought we were weak," he said. "They thought we'd kneel. But we are human, and we don't break." Cheers rose in the room. Young soldiers, old miners, doctors, farmers, they all wore scraps of armor, patched-up gear, and eyes filled with fire. "Tomorrow," Mason said, "we hit back harder." Above them, Skorvex watched the footage of Mason's last mission. The human had taken out a full wide-drath strike team with only 3 people and a bag of explosives. At the end of the video, Mason looked directly into the camera and raised a single finger, not as a threat, but a promise. Skorvex turned away. He didn't understand. The humans were not the strongest, not the smartest, not the most advanced, but they were unkillable. The sun was rising slowly over the damaged cities of Kalen 9. Black smoke painted the sky, and the once quiet colony world now sounded like thunder, explosions, shouting, and the endless crackle of gunfire. Inside his command ship, General Skorvex stood stiffly. His long cloak brushed against the floor as he walked through the war room. Screens blinked red with warnings. Battlefields were marked by glowing circles, each one a place where his forces were losing. He was not used to this. He had won wars in 3 galaxies. He had crushed resistance wherever it appeared. But now, on this distant human colony, his army was being pushed back by miners, engineers, and a few trained soldiers. And worse, they weren't giving up. "How many humans remain on Kalen 9? Skorvex asked. The data officer replied, "We estimate at least 12,000 are still active. More are joining the fight every day." Skorvex narrowed his eyes. "They should be retreating or hiding." "They're not, General. They're organizing." That word echoed in his mind. Organizing, like a real army. He had studied human history before the attack. Only briefly. He had seen their past battles, their primitive weapons, their strange mix of bravery and foolishness. He had thought they were soft. Now he knew better. In the southern valley of Kalen 9, a group of wide-drath shock troops advanced toward an abandoned factory. It looked quiet, no movement. They scanned the building and prepared to enter. But as the first soldier stepped through the door, the floor gave way. A metal net shot up from the ground, trapping 4 of them. From the shadows, human fighters opened fire from all angles. One alien screamed for backup, but the signal was jammed. Sergeant Cole and his team had been waiting all night for this moment. Their weapons were basic, but their timing was perfect. "Push. Forward!" Cole shouted. "Don't let them regroup!" The humans didn't fight like trained soldiers. They fought like survivors. Fast, fearless, clever. One fighter used broken glass and mirrors to blind a wide-drath sniper. Another tossed a homemade bomb made from fuel cells and scrap metal. It exploded with a deep roar, shaking the valley floor. Bye. The time alien reinforcements arrived, the factory was burning, and the humans had disappeared into the smoke. Back on the command ship, Scorvex watched the footage with a clenched jaw. "Sir," said one of his lieutenants, "we captured one of the humans." Scorvex nodded slowly. "Bring him." A few minutes later, a human was dragged into the war room in chains. He was covered in dirt and blood, but he stood tall, his eyes calm. Scorvex stepped closer. "What is your name, soldier?" "Doesn't matter," the man replied. Scorvex stared into the human's eyes. There was no fear there, only determination. "You are losing," the general said. "You cannot defeat the Ydrath Empire." The human smiled. "You think this is us fighting at full strength? This is just the beginning." Scorvex's face twitched. "You are a colony, cut off from Earth. Your supplies are limited, your weapons are outdated. What makes you so confident?" The human's answer was soft, but it hit like thunder. "Because we're human. We don't stop." Scorvex had the human taken away, but the words stayed with him. He ordered his science team to look deeper into human biology. He wanted to know why they kept fighting, why their wounds healed faster than expected, why they refused to give up. After days of study, the science officer came back with answers. "Sir," he said carefully, "it's not that their bodies are stronger than ours, it's their mind. Their brain chemistry changes under pressure. Pain becomes fuel, fear becomes fire. They don't shut down like other species." Scorvex frowned. "Explain." "When humans are hurt or cornered, their minds push back harder. They release chemicals that dull pain and sharpen focus. They remember every loss, every victory. It makes them nearly unstoppable." The general turned toward the window, looking down at the planet once more. "They are not the most powerful," he whispered, "but they are the most stubborn, and that made them dangerous." Meanwhile, Colonel Mason and the Ghost Battalion were deep in the northern mountains, where snow covered the trees and made the roads icy. They used it to their advantage. They built traps in the forests and turned the terrain against the invaders. At night, they moved silently like shadows. They attacked supply lines, stole weapons, and disappeared before anyone could find them. In one daring mission, Mason and just 10 soldiers snuck into an alien base and rescued 20 captured colonists. They left behind a message painted on the wall in red. "You can't kill what doesn't quit." The message spread like wildfire. Other colonies across the stars picked up the transmission. Some thought the humans on Kalin 9 were already lost. Now they realized they were still fighting and winning. Small rebellions began on other planets. The Ydrath Empire was no longer feared the same way. A seed of hope had been planted. Scorvex saw the reports. His empire was cracking, not from a major battle, but from the courage of a few humans on a single forgotten world. The general ordered his elite hunter units to find Colonel Mason. "I want him alive," he growled. "I want to know how he leads these unkillable fighters." But Mason was always one step ahead. He changed camps every night. He used old mining tunnels to move across the mountains. He never stayed in one place for more than a few hours. And he was not alone. New volunteers joined the Ghost Battalion every day. Young, old, trained, or not. They all came for the same reason, to protect their home. One night, in a quiet cave, lit by a small fire, Mason looked at his team. "They don't understand us," he said. "They think strength is only in muscle and machines." He looked around the group. Farmers holding rifles, medics turned warriors, teenagers carrying old helmets. "But we have something more powerful. We have each other." Back on the warship, General Scorvex began to change. He spent less time giving orders and more time watching human recordings. He studied their history, their wars, their struggles, their victories. He saw how Earth had survived plagues, disasters, and world wars. He saw how humans had built rockets and touched the stars, not because it was easy, but because they refused to stop trying. They are not weak, he finally admitted to himself. They are the most dangerous enemy we've ever faced. He sat alone in his chamber, watching the same battle clip over and over again, the one where the human got stabbed, smiled, and kept fighting. Scorvex rubbed his forehead. What kind of species does that? Then he heard a voice behind him. General, our troops are retreating from the northern mountains. The humans, they're pushing us back. Scorvex turned slowly. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even surprised anymore. He was starting to understand. These weren't just enemies, they were humans, and they were just getting started. Snowfall had started again in the high mountains of Kalen 9. The wind was cold and sharp, blowing through the trees like a whisper of war. Deep in those woods, a group of soldiers moved silently through the snow, their breaths forming clouds. In the icy air, they wore mismatched gear. Some had armored chest plates, others wore thick coats, stitched with patches. Their leader, Colonel Mason, moved in front, his eyes sharp, every step careful. These were no ordinary fighters. They were known across the planet, and now across the galaxy, as the Ghost Battalion. Every alien soldier feared hearing that name, because whenever the ghosts appeared, something went terribly wrong for the Weedrath army. Their targets vanished. Their equipment exploded. Their morale broke, and no matter how hard the aliens tried, they could never catch them. On this cold morning, Colonel Mason and his team were preparing to raid a Weedrath forward base. The aliens had set up camp near a power station thinking it was safe, but the ghosts had been watching for days, studying their patterns, weaknesses, and blind spots. Mason knelt behind a snow-covered rock and looked through a pair of old binoculars. They changed patrol rotation again, he whispered. One of his lieutenants, a young woman named Sarah, replied, Still leaves a 3-minute gap near the east gate. Mason nodded. That's all we need. Back at the base, the Weedrath commander was relaxing. He had grown lazy, confident that no human would attack such a well-defended post. He had no idea the ghosts were already inside. At exactly 0300 hours, a silent explosion took out the power grid. The lights went dark, sirens blared. Before the aliens could even grab their weapons, the humans struck. They moved like smoke, quick, quiet, deadly. Colonel Mason led the charge. His team disabled turrets, jammed communication signals, and planted charges. In just 7 minutes, the entire base was in flames. As they escaped through the woods, Mason left behind a message scratched into a metal panel. We are the storm. You can't stop us. When General Scorvex saw the footage later, his claws clenched around the edge of his chair. He had doubled security at that post. It had tanks, drones, and elite guards, and still, it was gone. How many did they lose? He asked his officer. None, sir, came the reply. 0 human casualties. Scorvex's face darkened. How is that possible? They're not following normal battle patterns, the officer said. They don't fight like an army. They fight like a force of nature. That... Same day, another message reached Scorvex. A group of alien commanders were requesting permission to retreat. They had heard the stories about unkillable human fighters, about the Ghost Battalion, about colonists who fought with shovels and still won. Fear was spreading among the alien ranks, and that fear was doing something dangerous. It was giving the humans hope. In the underground tunnels below Kalen 9's capital ruins, resistance leaders were meeting. Colonel Mason stood in the center, pointing at a map drawn on cracked paper. The Weedrath control these 3 areas, he said, but they're not expecting us to hit all of them at once. A grizzled miner raised a hand. We're short on guns. What if they bring those flying machines again? Mason nodded. That's why we hit their airstrip first. Sarah's team will handle it. The room went silent. Everyone looked at Sarah. She smiled calmly. Leave it to us. Across the war front, the plan came together. Farmers planted bombs in crates of food. Old engineers hacked alien drones. A group of students created a signal to jam Ydrath ships. Everyone played a part. This was no longer a small fight. It had become a movement. Meanwhile, General Skorvex was no longer sleeping. He spent his nights watching recordings of human battles. The same strange thing happened every time. The humans should have lost. But they didn't. Even when outnumbered, even when injured, even when cornered, they just kept coming. He started noticing patterns. Humans helping each other, risking their lives to save strangers. Soldiers with broken bones still crawling forward. Teenagers throwing smoke grenades to cover their elders. It made no sense. In Ydrath society, weakness was punished. Failure was shameful. Loyalty was bought with fear. But humans, they fought for each other. That made them unstoppable. Back in the mountain pass, Mason's ghosts prepared for another mission. This time, it was personal. They had located a Ydrath lab where human prisoners were being experimented on. "We're going to shut it down," Mason said. "All of it." The lab was hidden in a rocky canyon, guarded by tall walls and energy fields. But the ghosts had studied it for a week. They knew the guard shifts. They knew the blind spots. At midnight, they struck. One team climbed the cliff walls with ropes. Another crawled through an old sewage pipe. A third moved through the shadows below the moonlight. Once inside, they freed the prisoners, downloaded the lab's files, and planted explosives along the walls. The mission was smooth until a Ydrath. Patrol arrived early. A firefight broke out. Lasers lit the dark. Alarms echoed in the rocks. Mason's team fought hard, but one of his men was hit. "Leave me," the man shouted. Mason didn't even pause. He grabbed him by the collar and carried him out on his back, dodging fire the whole way. Bullets grazed his armor. A beam struck his shoulder. Still, he didn't stop. They made it out just as the lab exploded behind them. From the cliffs, they watched the fire rise into the sky. The rescued prisoners cried. Some hugged the ghosts. Some just stood there, too shocked to speak. Mason placed a hand on the shoulder of a young woman. "You're safe now," he said gently. The news of the rescue spread fast. In distant systems, other alien races, once scared, once silent, began to rise up. They saw that if humans could fight the Empire, maybe they could too. Skorvex saw it all. He saw that Kalen 9 was no longer a battle. It was becoming a symbol, a small world with few weapons, where the enemy refused to give in. A place where courage lived in the hearts of ordinary people. A place where even death couldn't stop the will to fight. He finally stood in front of his officers and spoke the truth. "We misjudged them." The room went still. "They are not weak," he continued. "They are not primitive." He looked at the burning maps, the flashing red lights. They are human, and that makes them dangerous. From the back of the room, a voice asked, "What do we do now?" Skorvex turned, his voice cold. "We prepare for the worst, because I fear this is only the beginning." A quiet tension filled the command room aboard the Ydrath warship. The giant screen showed red alert zones spreading across Kalen 9 like wildfire. Each blinking light marked another failed attack, another lost outpost, another unexpected human victory. General Skorvex stood motionless, hands behind his back, staring at the screen. His army was being outsmarted. His elite soldiers were retreating. And worst of all, his enemies, humans, were growing bolder by the day. "They're not just defending anymore," Skorvex said in a deep voice. "They're hunting us." His officers remained silent. No one dared to speak. They could all see the truth. The humans were no longer afraid. They had tasted victory. And now, they wanted more. Skorvex turned to his science commander. "Tell me what makes them like this. Why don't they break?" The scientist looked uneasy. "We've studied everything, General. Their biology, their brain waves, their battle records. and we have only one conclusion. Skorvex narrowed. His eyes. Speak. They fight with something we don't understand. Not fear, not duty, something else. The general waited. They fight with love, sir. Love for home. Love for each other. They're not just fighting to survive. They're fighting for every person behind them. Skorvex growled softly. You call that a weapon? In their hands. Yes. The general turned back to the screen, and in his chest, for the first time in his long military career, he felt something he had never felt before. Worry. Meanwhile, deep underground in a hidden base on Kalin 9, Colonel Mason was watching a different screen. His team had intercepted enemy signals. They were reading wide-draft communications and learning how the alien army thought, moved, and panicked. They're falling apart, Sarah said, pointing to a map filled with alien movements. They're pulling soldiers from the west to protect the north. That means their supply route is weak. Mason nodded. Then we hit them there. Hard. All across Kalin 9, humans began to move. Small teams attacked fuel convoys. Others planted explosives on bridges and tunnels. Communication towers were knocked offline one by one. Alien drones crashed from the sky. But Mason had a bigger plan. He knew the Wide-Drath had a central command center on the planet, a tall black tower with thick armor high above the city ruins. If they could take it out, the alien army would lose. Coordination. No orders. No leadership. It was risky. The tower was heavily guarded, shielded, armed to the teeth, but that never stopped Mason before. He gathered his best fighters, Sarah, Cole, the sniper twins, Liam and Leo, and a few new recruits. All of them had the same look in their eyes. They were ready. We get in. We plant charges at the tower base. And we get out before the fireworks, Mason explained. No mistakes. No fear. The team moved at night. They used the ruins as cover. They crawled through pipes, climbed over fallen walls, and slid past patrols. Every step was silent. Every breath measured. Inside the tower, Skorvex's top officer was speaking on a secure line. We are strengthening the core defenses. The humans won't get close. But he was wrong. The Ghost Battalion was already in the lower levels. Cole disabled the power lines. Sarah hacked into the elevator system. Liam and Leo cleared the side halls. Within 10 minutes, Mason's team reached the structural base. They planted the explosives quickly. Just as they were about to retreat, alarms began to blare. A squad of Wide-Drath guards burst into the corridor. A firefight broke out. Lasers flashed. Debris filled the air. Mason covered the rear while his team escaped. One alien shot grazed his leg, but he kept firing, kept moving. Go! I'll be right behind you! He shouted. Cole grabbed Mason and pulled him out just as the timer hit 10 seconds. The team jumped into an old sewage tunnel. A moment later, the tower shook from the explosion. A deep rumble spread across the city. On the command ship, Skorvex felt the vibration even from orbit. He turned toward the planet and watched smoke rise from the tower. They did it, he said quietly. His second-in-command looked at him in fear. Should we pull back? Skorvex said nothing. He was remembering something, an old human speech he had once heard. It was a recording from Earth's ancient past. A leader standing before a crowd saying, "You can break our walls. You can crush our cities, but you can never break our spirit." Now Skorvex understood what it meant. Later that night, Mason and his team returned to their mountain base. They were bruised, burned, but smiling. "You did it," Sarah said. "That tower was their backbone." Mason nodded, then sat down, breathing heavily. "We didn't do it for the glory," he said. "We did it so others won't have to." Elsewhere on the planet, alien troops were panicking. With the tower gone, orders stopped. Supplies didn't arrive. Reinforcements got lost. Some alien soldiers tried to escape. Some surrendered. Others just ran. But some, like Skorvex, stayed behind. The general was not ready to give up. He sent a final message to Mason's frequency. I wish to meet you and me, face to face. Everyone in the base went silent when the message played. Was it a trap or a sign of defeat? Mason replied simply, "Name the place." An hour later, in the middle of a ruined city square, the two leaders stood across from each other. Mason wore his dusty combat gear, his helmet in his hand. Skorvek stood tall in his shining armor, his long cloak swaying in the wind. They said nothing for a while, just looked at each other. Finally, Skorvex spoke. "You fight like no army I've ever seen." "We're not an army," Mason replied. "We're a people, and we don't kneel." Skorvex looked up at the smoke in the sky. "You destroyed my tower. You've damaged my fleet. You've turned my soldiers into cowards. And yet," Mason said, "you're still here." The general turned back to him. "I want to understand." "Understand what? Why don't you give up? You should be tired. You should be broken." Mason stepped forward. "Because we're human. We don't quit when it's hard. We rise when we fall. We fight for each other even when there's no hope. That's what makes us strong." Skorvex didn't respond. His mind was full of thoughts, defeat, confusion, maybe even respect. He finally said, "This war has changed me." Mason nodded. "It changed us too, but not into something worse. It reminded us who we are." The two men stood there, surrounded by ruins, but also by something new, understanding. Back at the human base, people waited for news. When Mason returned, the room exploded in cheers, but he simply raised his hand. "We're not done yet," he said, "but we're close." Across the galaxy, stories of Kalen 9 spread. People didn't talk about weapons or ships. They talked about courage. They talked about hope. They talked about humans, how they stood against an empire and didn't fall. And deep inside his heart, General Skorvex knew the truth. No matter how strong the Idrath Empire had been, they had met something stronger. The war on Kalen 9 had entered its final chapter. The skies above the planet were dark with smoke, and the ground was scarred by fire and battles. But there was something new in the air. Hope. Across the broken cities, human flags, made from old cloth, uniforms, and even curtains, were rising on rooftops. Each flag wasn't just a symbol of resistance, it was a message. We are still here. General Skorvex stood at the window of his warship, staring down at the world that had challenged him like no other. He had lost thousands of soldiers. His strongest bases were destroyed. His reputation across the galaxy was damaged. But what bothered him the most was not the destruction. It was the spirit of the humans. They were not the strongest. They did not have the best weapons. Yet no matter how many times they were knocked down, they rose again, like fire that refused to die. "They will come for us now," one officer said behind him. Skorvex did not reply. He already knew. Down on the planet, Colonel Mason stood in front of a crowd of fighters. His leg was still injured from the tower mission, but he refused to sit. Around him were young men and women, old miners, ex-engineers, farmers, and former teachers, all turned soldiers. Behind him, the flag of Earth stood tall, patched with metal and dirt. "This is our moment," Mason said. "We've pushed them back. We've shaken their empire. But the fight is not over until we make sure they never return." Cheers broke out. The humans were tired, bruised, and some were still bandaged from past battles, but their eyes were filled with fire. Sarah stepped forward with a data pad. "We've decoded their fleet signals. We know where they'll try to regroup. They'll try to escape through orbit," Cole added. "Their flagship is preparing to leave," Mason nodded. "Then we stop them. One last time. The plan was dangerous. They didn't have spaceships. They didn't have fighter jets. But what they did have was courage. An old mining station had a launch platform still working, with some repairs and power cells from salvaged Udrath tech they could launch a team into orbit using a reprogrammed cargo ship. Inside the ship, Mason's final team prepared for the mission. Sarah, Cole, Liam, Leo, and 3 others would go. "This isn't just a strike," Mason told them. "This is a message to every world watching. We're not just fighting for Kalen 9, we're fighting for every free mind in this galaxy." As the ship began its launch, hundreds of humans stood below, watching and cheering. Some cried, some saluted, others simply whispered, "Go get them!" The ship broke through the atmosphere, shaking hard. Inside, the team braced for impact as they approached the Wydrath flagship. Meanwhile, aboard the warship, Scorvex received a report. "Human ship approaching. Fast." The officer looked confused. "It's not a warship. It's a mining cargo vessel." Scorvex's eyes widened. "Prepare all defenses." But it was too late. The cargo ship crashed through the hangar bay, sending sparks and smoke everywhere. The Ghost Battalion jumped out, weapons ready, taking the alien guards by surprise. They split into 2 teams. One headed to the engine core. The other went for the control bridge. Liam and Leo covered the hallways with sniper fire. Sarah hacked the doors. Cole placed explosives on the fuel lines. Mason, bleeding from a small cut above his eye, marched toward the bridge. Every step reminded him of the faces he'd seen during the war. Friends lost, cities burned, and victories earned through pain. Inside the bridge, Scorvex waited. He didn't run. He didn't hide. When Mason entered, the 2 men locked eyes. Once more. "You're here," Scorvex said quietly. "This ends today," Mason replied. Scorvex drew his blade. Mason raised his rifle. But after a long pause, neither moved. Scorvex slowly lowered his weapon. "You win, human, not because of your strength, but because you made me understand something." Mason stepped forward, cautious. "What?" "You taught me that real power isn't in fear or fire. It's in the heart." Mason lowered his gun. For a moment, the war seemed distant. Scorvex walked to the ship's controls and broadcasted a galaxy-wide signal, a message to every world, every colony, every empire. "This is General Scorvex of the Ydrath. We surrender. Kalen 9 is not a loss of territory. It is a lesson, and we will never forget it." The war was over. Back on Kalen 9, people wept and hugged. Sirens went silent. Fires stopped burning, and for the first time in months, the wind felt soft. Colonel. Mason and his team returned to the surface as heroes, but they didn't act like champions. They simply returned to work, rebuilding, helping, healing. In the years that followed, stories of Kalen 9 spread across galaxies. Not stories about weapons or battles, but about human spirit. About how ordinary people, when pushed to the edge, became something unstoppable. Statues were built in their honor, not of soldiers, but of farmers with tools, children holding flags, and families standing side by side. One quote was carved into every monument: "You can't kill what refuses to surrender." As for Scorvex, he disappeared from public life. Some said he returned to his homeworld in silence. Others believed he walked among humans in secret, trying to learn more. But the last known message from him was simple: respect the humans. Not because they are perfect, but because they never stop fighting for what matters. And across the stars, the name human no longer meant weak. It meant something more. It meant unbreakable, unstoppable, unkillable.